It is my great pleasure to host today in this Ask the Author session Professor Quentin Anstee, which is a well-known investigator in the field of MASLD, who published recently a paper entitled Prognostic Utility of Fib4 Index for Risk of Subsequent Liver and Cardiovascular Events and All-Cause Mortality in Individuals with Obesity and or Diabetes Type 2, a longitudinal cohort study which was published in Lancet Regional Health Europe. So first of all, Quentin, thank you very much for being with us today. Congratulations for this paper. So Fib4, well introduced, easy to calculate, platelets, AST, ALT, age, different cutoffs, and you are able to know if the patients to identify patients who have fibrosis or not. But here you're going beyond the diagnostic aspect of the Fib4 when you go also for prognostic. So Quentin, what is the methodology you use in this paper?
Yeah, absolutely. Jean-Francois, thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk about this paper. So as you rightly say, Fib4 was developed for the diagnostic criteria to identify advanced fibrosis in a range of different conditions and has been validated as actually being quite performant for that across a range of different liver diseases. It particularly is strong for its negative predictive value, and as you know, it's been adopted in a lot of guidelines. What we wanted to do here was move beyond that question about the diagnosis and address the point, well, if it tells you about how much fibrosis is there, how good is it at predicting long-term outcomes? So what we did was we took a very large primary care database from the United Kingdom, the CPRD database, 44,000 individuals. We identified those, as you say, with metabolic risks, so diabetes or obesity. And then we looked firstly to determine whether baseline Fib4 operated prognostically, in other words, could predict long-term outcomes. There were about 6,000 cardiovascular events in this cohort during follow-up. There were about 1,000 liver-related events and just under 9,000 all-cause mortality events. And the really interesting first conclusion from the paper is that a raised Fib4 is prognostically useful for both predicting liver-related events and cardiovascular events, and therefore all-cause mortality. So that was the first question we wanted to address. The second thing we wanted to look at was if you were to measure Fib4 serially over a period of time, does that add further information? And of course, the beauty of Fib4, as you've said, Jean-Francois, is it's easy to deliver, it requires standard tests and can be processed in hospitals across the world. And because it's cheap, you can do it year after year after year. So we looked at individuals where we had serial measurements, 2 further measurements, and we identified about 20,000 individuals who we could do that. And what we found was that by factoring in the delta from the first measure to the second, the change in Fib4, it added additional prognostic value. So if you were high risk and your risk continued to rise on your Fib4, that was obviously a particularly worrying group. Conversely, if you were initially high risk and on the reread, your Fib4 had fallen, your hazard ratio dropped with that. And so this allows us to tune our prognostication over time.
Well, very important results. I really love to see that in the literature now. So, Quentin, we have Fib4 is, as you said, well established for diagnosis. Now you're adding prognosis information. So why there's so much difficulties that laboratories measured it automatically, and we have the EGFR. We know that it's well established. We should do the same thing for the Fib4. What do you think?
I completely agree. I mean, one of the challenges, and it's something that Jean-Francois, I know you and I have talked about before, is that it very much depends how hospitals and laboratories are organized. In many healthcare systems, the hematology laboratory and the biochemistry laboratory are separate entities, and it's not necessarily possible to put those data together to calculate something like the Fib4. I think that's changing. More and more, we're seeing this built into electronic care records as an automated calculation. And I think that as the technology and the interconnectivity develops, we're going to be in a better and better place to be able to do that.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. And you are a driving force there. So thank you very much, Quentin, for being with us today and to commenting on this FIB4 on your paper. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much.